Hello everybody. To the continuation of my previous video when I was comparing 2080 Ti against my 3080 10GB, where I noticed that when we pass the VRAM size of 10GB 3080 by like 2 more gigabytes, 3080 becomes much slower than 2080 1GB, which was only over its VRAM capacity by 1GB, as that card has a 11GB of VRAM. So I decided to make another test to compare 3080 10GB against 3080 12GB and against so-called 3080 24GB, which could be the clickbait for this video, but it's as you can tell, it's a downclock 3090, which I underclock to match the scores of 3080 12GB, and especially the 3080 12GB a little bit faster than 10GB, so the gap between 3090 and 3080 12GB is pretty small. But anyway, to make it even more interesting video, I downclocked, I make the testing in the 3D Mark to be sure that the cores, at least, they both score so similar points. So here we can see in the Speedway 3080 12GB 4441, 3090 4417, and here we can see that this is probably the lowest 3090 score because obviously it's underclocked. So the next one is a Port Royal, and there also we'll see that scores almost perfectly match by like maybe 1% difference, and here is even less than, it's just 1 point difference. So I was fine-tuning the core speed to get as close as possible, so in order to be able to call it like 3080 24GB. Here this is a time spy. We can see again scores almost perfectly matching. CPU score was the same, and this is a Firestrike Ultra, again pretty close. And here we can see physics matching, graphics scores almost matching, combined scores almost matching. So we can be sure and we can call it, let's say for this one is 3080 24GB, even though it's a clickbait, but it's an interesting test. Let's see how they will behave. So here we can see that I almost managed to match completely the frames per second here. They just, let's say the average is the same. When 3080 10GB, as I say, it's slower card, so here we can see that it's, in this game at least, it's 12% slower. Plus we can see 1% lows, even though the average frames they match, but the 1% frames per second, the 3080 24GB is 9% higher. You can ask why it can be this way if the average score match, because here if you will pay attention, just look at the RAM difference. It's almost 2GB difference, even though the VRAM utilization is matching, but somehow the game is pushing some files to the RAM of the CPU and then using that. Maybe that's the low priority files, I don't know, but that's have an impact on the 1% low, and here we can see that it's 9% faster because it says enough VRAM. Maybe the card sees that there is the headroom for the VRAM is like another like 14GB left, so the game is not, let's say, going to push any spare files to the CPU RAM, and whenever they need that files, it just quickly transfer to the GPU VRAM. But in this case, they store some files in the CPU RAM. In this case, that's files is even bigger. That's why we have even lower 1% low compared to these two versions. But this is 100% rendering scales, no DLSS, ultra presets, both in 40p. And we can see that, as I said, that the average frames, even the in-game frame rates, they almost perfectly match. It shows that the 3D Mark results was accurate, and we can assume that if in 3D Mark they match, they should match also in the games, or less maybe just 1 or 2 frame rates difference. Now let's increase the rendering scale to 120. At 120 we can see that again more files being pushed to the CPU RAM compared to the 3080 24GB, and the usage and the allocation both increased by maybe like 600 megabyte. But again, here we can see that as the game still within 12 gigabyte of limits, the average frames per second they match. In this case, maybe it's a second run, the game already like have that file stored or whatever reason, but like 1% low gap is not so big, it was just 2%. Now let's see what will happen on 140. When we increase the rendering scale to 140, we can see that the VRAM utilization is increasing. The RAM for the 24 gigabyte 3080 is the same regardless of rendering scale. Here it's increasing, the same situation in 3080 10 gigabyte. And in this case, it just, as I said, it's a 1 FPS difference, but we can assume it's a margin of error. So again, it's not above 12 gigabytes, so the average frames they completely match. And somehow in this case 1% loss also, it was like 3%, it's like 1 frame difference, again margin of error. But here is the most interesting thing which we can see. We increase to 160, we see that we passed 25 gigabyte for CPU RAM, where here we have even less CPU RAM utilization compared to other rendering scales. And here also we can see that as we past 12 gigabyte, here it's like almost 700 megabyte is being pushed to the CPU RAM, the files which is needed for the game to run, not like a low priority file which can be stored there for later use. And here also the same story, it's already 25 gigabyte, when we can see that it's like we're almost missing 3 gigabyte of files which is going to be used from the CPU RAM. So here we see the results. Same card, let's say, if NVIDIA was released this card instead of 12, like 24 gigabytes, then we can say that we could comfortably play this game even with higher VRAM utilization, which in this case we can see that this GPU is perfectly capable of running the game on 30 FPS and even more, which is normal for console gaming. And further, this video I'll show you that the modern games even dip below 30 FPS in PlayStation 5 and nobody cares, they will be playing happily. Nobody's complaining for this type of games. But here, when 1% lows dip below 24, you will definitely see that. And here we can see that we are dipping to 22, and here we can see that even the ongoing FPS is below 24, which is completely unplayable. Here in this case it will be somehow playable, but it will not be so comfortable. But here it's a console level gaming, and the difference we can see that same GPU, let's say, just by getting more VRAM, we're getting 25% more in average FPS and 36% more in 1% loss. And here is completely disaster, like it's the same GPU, it's so much wasted here, only by providing 10 gigabyte. Even this 12 gigabyte is wasted. They could do like 16 gigabyte and then just skip 10 and 12. Just have a 16 gigabyte 3080 and like 24 3090 as they did with the 4000 series. But they know that new games is coming, they definitely knew, and that games are going to utilize more VRAM. Then that's a good way of pushing you to sell your GPUs, even though they are perfectly capable of running these games even like in 4K. Because here we shows we already went up like 60% the rendering scale, and still this GPU is perfectly fine. It can render the frames if GPU has enough VRAM. But in this case it cannot do it because of VRAM limit. And here we can see that the CPU RAM, if you have 24 gig, you can have 16 gigabyte and play this game comfortably. But here you have to upgrade your CPU RAM at least to 32 gigabyte. The next game, again, the game which used a lot of VRAM, even more than Last of Us. And here we are playing on ultra settings, rendering scale 100%, no DLSS 1440p. And we can see that instantly, even at 100% scale, when the game sees that we have a more VRAM available for the GPU, it goes and uses that VRAM. Instead of pushing here, we can see almost 900 megabyte is being pushed to the CPU RAM. And here, almost like 5 gigabyte, 5.5 gigabyte is being pushed to the CPU RAM. And the results you can see here. The average is just 2%, 1% low is 12% higher, and the 3080 10 gigabyte is the slowest. Also, its GPU is slower, not only for the RAM, but because of fewer CUDA cores. But again, let's see what will happen when we will increase the rendering scale to 120, how the game will handle. Because now, as I said from previous tests, we already found out that each game has some low priority files and higher priority files. When low priority files is being pushed to the CPU RAM, the game doesn't suffer that much as it was in the previous example when the rendering scale was 100. In that case, we see that the RAM was pushed to the CPU RAM, the VRAM was pushed to the CPU RAM, but the game doesn't suffer that much. It just lost like 2%, which could be easily the margin of error. But only 1% loss is a little bit visible. But when high priority files is being pushed, that's gap already increasing, and that's performance difference is coming to another level. So here we can see again, like the game sees that it has a 24 gigabyte and allowed to use more than the game which sees that the card has only 12 gigabyte. So again, we can see that the gap increased. Here too is almost like 7 gigabyte instead of 5.5. Here is almost 2 gigabyte. But again, as the GPU is pretty capable and the low priority files is being pushed to the CPU RAM, the game managed to run almost same average frames per second. But 3080, it has 2 gigabytes less and already is pushing the higher priority files to the CPU RAM. That's why instead of being like 10% slower, which is the actual difference more or less between the 3080 10 gigabyte and 12 gigabyte, as I said, due to the fewer CUDA cores, it is lower by 36%. And 1% low, 99%. Why is that? Because high priority files already have to go to the CPU RAM. You cannot keep the high priority files in the GPU VRAM due to the lack of that, only by reaching the 150%. And now the bonus round where I did the 180%, and there was no need to torture 10 gigabytes even more. We already saw the difference. So from 180%, when even more files being pushed, the gap already increasing by, let's see, 700 megabytes more compared to 150 rendering scale. You're already starting to notice that some higher priority files is being pushed to the CPU RAM, and thus the performance gap is increasing. When in previous 150 scale, the performance gap was almost equal, like this is the margin of error. But when we go to 180%, that's already starting to be noticeable, and we are getting barely minimum frames per second to be able to comfortably play this game. So 118% to 100, and this is 15% more compared to 12 gigabyte. So the last thing which I'm curious to test, because this is the least possible frame rates to make this game playable, already reaching 30 frames, even though I said that the consoles go as low as 24, but for me personally, I prefer to have 1% lowest at 30 FPS, because this is a short scene. In some more intensive scene, we have to have that headroom in order to dip even more, like that's 6 frames will be our like safety margin. So this is the minimum. When I see in the testing we're hitting the 30 FPS, I call it the last possible. So now let's increase to 200. We see with 200 only the capable GPU here from the list is a so-called 3080 24 gigabyte, which we downclocked. We can see here it's a downclock. It's running like 1715 megahertz, and here we can see that the game runs perfectly fine. It can render. You see the smooth line. It can render with the console level like 32, 31, you can see nothing. You just can enjoy playing with these settings. Let's say 16 gigabytes, and the GPU handles this game. You can see like I play a little bit instead of just running around. I didn't notice any dips, anything. You can play, you can turn off this statistics, and even maybe you wouldn't notice that the game running on the mid 30 FPS. So 3080, one more time, proves that it's really good GPU. Just the VRAM which it gets from the factory is the limiting factor. If that card was good with the 16 gigabyte, then it would be just maybe completely enough for other like 2 or 3 years of gaming without thinking even upgrading your GPU. And the last game is the Hogwarts Legacy. These games tested in previous video was showing a dip in performance, especially at the last of the scene. So now let's see what will happen. This running Ultra preset, Ray Tracing Ultra, no DLSS 1440p. And here is a, don't pay attention to this, it's a mistake, there should be maybe 99%. But here the average FPS is almost equal, but look at the 1% low difference. Later you will see where that difference comes. It's 92% because this game has very few low priority data available. And look at the performance of 10 gigabyte version. Ideally it should be like 10% slower due to fewer CUDA cores, but here is like almost 41% slower. In 1% low is 80% almost lower, but this is compared to the unplayable 1% low. Compared to the playable 1% low, that's like around 70% difference. If the percentage is not counted better, but to make it simple, let's say 5 frames against 27 frames. Here the last scene, you will see what will happen with this game. As I said, it has very few low priority data compared to the Resident Evil, and as soon as the high priority data is being pushed to the CPU RAM, the performance just dips, just the GPU just died. And here everything was smooth, more or less even higher average FPS, but that's a margin of error due to the movement, maybe due to some background task which the computer was doing. We came to the last scene, we see 11.1, 11.7. So already we can know that some low priority data is being pushed to the CPU RAM. It's clearly visible here. Almost 2 gigabyte is being pushed here, but when even more is being pushed, here we go. 14 frames. It dips to 14 frames as it cannot handle any more rendering without having that data in the VRAM, and have to pull that data from the CPU RAM. 3080, completely capable GPU die, but the lack of VRAM which kills this card. More you play, more you will see this kind of dips, and even more dips because the lack of VRAM. But here, no issue. Card holding its performance. You can see it's completely smooth. Again, it's a console level of gaming. Now let's see what I mean by like that. These clips, the same game. This is a Xbox, PlayStation. Look at the frame rates. That's already below than our 3080. Even sometimes it goes below 30 FPS. Like in this game, Jedi, you can see some scenes it will dip up to 24 frames. Pay attention here. 25, 24, 23 even. 23, we saw 23. 23. It dips to 23 frames. Nobody's complaining. Everybody's playing this game. using PlayStation 5, Xbox. So, but for me personally, I prefer 1% low to have on 30, to have some headroom in some more intensive scenes when that extra like 6 frames have impact. So that's an interesting video, let's say. We saw, let's say we proved that 3080 on downclock 3090, which is getting the same score as 3080. 3D Mark, also in the low intensive VRAM presets, it's getting the same frame rates. But as soon as we increase the VRAM utilization, the frame rate dips. And this is the settings which I was playing. If somebody is interested, you'll see. This is for Last of Us. As I said, it's ultra settings, everything on ultra. And these cards could easily play 4K if they have enough VRAM. And this is the games which is especially the VRAM hungry. This is the Resident Evil, again, the settings which I was playing. Everything maxed out. Even though the game says 12.3 GB utilization, but you can see that it was using more than that. And some files have been pushed to the CPU RAM. So 16.6 GB of usage. So from today's testing, what I can say, my current recommendation is very simple based on the test of this video and the previous video, that if you wanna play on 1080p Ultra including ray tracing, just skip all the new series which is coming, the 4060, 4060 Ti, from all generation 3070, from AMD 6700, 6700 XT, and just grab 2080 Ti. If you can make us testing before buying, just run a superposition on 8K for mark, watch for the artifacts, watch for the temperatures. If everything is fine, you can grab that card for $200, $250 and run the games for like 2-3 years to come, and without worrying that your game will be, your GPU will be lack of the memory and game will start running below 30 FPS until more demanding games will be released. Current games market, that's my recommendation for 1080p. 1440p, again, skip 4060 Ti, 4070. Just AMDs, from AMDs, you can, again, I'm pretty sure that the 6800, 6800 XT can be also skipped if you are playing the games with ray tracing. Just buy 3080 12GB for $400. It's a great value card. You can undervolt it, has even lower heat dissipation, running cool, low noise, and for 14p gaming, you can play almost all games except maybe this one on ultra settings, 1440p. And maybe in the future patches of the game situation will be improved, but now like it's in some sense it's unplayable. But again, if you turn on ray tracing ultra on AMD card, results will be similar or even worse. So 1440p, the bare minimum 3080 12GB. For 4K gaming, just if you have $100 more in your budget, or you can skip 2 games and save that money, add to your GPU budget, you can grab 3090 for $500. Just make sure that the card's memory chips are okay, temperatures is okay, because that has a memory chips on the both sides of PCB, and especially the back side. In some modifications, they run very hard, especially like this one, the Dell or HP. They even forget to put the Thermalright. Just sold the cards as it is without touching the backplate, which we fixed, but like you don't know how long it was running that condition, and that could like potentially decrease the lifespan of the chips. With 3090, you grab the card, 4K, it's perfectly fine, capable of running almost all games, and has enough VRAM for at least several years until the new games will be released, which will be so heavy on the GPU that even you have a free VRAM, but GPU will not be able to generate enough frames to run the game smoothly, and then you can think about upgrading to the next series. For the new cards, again, we can see that almost all new cards prices are coming down, maybe except the 4090s. If you have that position that you have to buy only a new cards, okay, but just wait a couple months more, you will have much better deals than now. So thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.